Laura's heart stopped for a second when she heard the words come out of Birkan's mouth. So casual, so matter-of-fact, as if he was talking about the weather and not about gambling away every single penny he touched, including the money she'd sent him for food, for rent, for a little bit of comfort, in a life that already felt like a gamble. You could see the shock on her face, the way her eyes darted, searching for some sign that this was a joke, a misunderstanding, anything but the truth she was being handed. But Birkan didn't flinch, didn't apologize, didn't even seem to realize the ground had just dropped out from under her. For Laura, it was like the world had tilted sideways. She'd come all this way, crossed an ocean, convinced herself that love could fix what logic warned her to run from, and now she was staring at a man who saw her trust as just another chip to play. If you're new here, I'm Aliva and this is Reality Sport, where we break down the wildest moments from 90 Day Fiancé and beyond. If you've ever screamed at your screen, girl, run. Or, how is this real life? You're in the right place. Hit subscribe, drop your hottest take in the comments, and buckle up, because this story is about to get messier than a Vegas slot machine at 3 a.m. Just hours before, Laura was floating on a cloud, convinced she'd finally found her happy ending. She'd landed in Turkey, suitcase full of hope, ready to start a new chapter with Birkan. He'd greeted her with flowers, a shy smile, and promises of a fresh start. There were selfies by the sea, laughter over strong coffee, and the kind of inside jokes that make you believe you're building something real. Laura let herself believe that maybe, just maybe, she'd beaten the odds. She ignored the little voice in her head that whispered about red flags, about secrets, about the way Birkan sometimes dodged questions about money or work. She wanted to believe in the fairy tale, and for a moment, it almost felt real. But now, sitting across from Birkan, the fairy tale had shattered. Laura's mind raced, replaying every conversation. Every time she'd sent him money, and he'd thanked her with a heart emoji and a promise to pay her back. She thought about the late-night calls where he'd sounded tired, stressed, but always insisted he was handling things. She remembered the way he'd brushed off her questions about his job, about his plans, about why he always seemed to need just a little more help. And now, the truth was out. Birkan wasn't just struggling. He was gambling. Not sometimes, not as a one-off, but every single time he had money in his hands. Even the money Laura sent, meant for food or rent, was just another bet to him. The disbelief wasn't just Laura's. Anyone watching could feel it. That gut punch of realizing someone you care about has been hiding a secret so big, so reckless, it changes everything. You start to question your own judgment, your own instincts. How did I miss this? How did I let myself get played? Laura's confusion was raw, her anger simmering just beneath the surface, but there was something else too. A deep, aching sadness. Because when you love someone, you want to believe the best. You want to believe you're building a future, not funding a habit. And yet, as Laura sat there, stunned, Birkan looked back at her with the calm of someone who's already decided this is normal, this is fine, this is just how life works. He didn't see the problem. He didn't see the risk. For him, gambling wasn't a crisis. It was a solution. But what Laura doesn't know yet is how deep this rabbit hole goes, and trust me, you're not going to want to miss what comes next. The airport doors slid open, and Laura stepped into the Turkish sunlight, her heart pounding with a mix of nerves and excitement. She'd replayed this moment in her head 100 times, picturing Birkan waiting for her, arms open, ready to sweep her into a new life. And there he was, holding a bouquet of flowers that looked a little wilted but still managed to make her smile. He hugged her tight, whispered something sweet in her ear, and for a second, all the doubts she'd packed in her suitcase seemed to melt away. This was it, she told herself. This was the start of something real, something worth fighting for. Birkan wasted no time turning on the charm. He whisked Laura away to a cozy seaside cafe, ordered her favorite coffee, and talked about all the places he wanted to show her. He promised her a surprise trip, somewhere romantic, somewhere they could forget about the world and focus on each other. Laura felt herself relax, letting the warmth of his attention wash over her. He made her laugh, teased her about her accent, and held her hand like he never wanted to let go. For a while, it was easy to believe that this was the fairy tale she'd been searching for. But even as she soaked in the romance, Laura couldn't ignore the tiny cracks starting to show. Birkan's phone buzzed constantly, and every time he glanced at the screen, his smile faded for just a second before snapping back into place. He brushed off questions about his work, saying he was between opportunities and that things would get better soon. When Laura offered to help pay for dinner, he hesitated, then let her cover the bill with a sheepish grin. She told herself it was no big deal. Relationships are about give and take, right? Still, a little voice in her head wondered why she always seemed to be the one giving. That night, as they walked along the water, Birkan pulled Laura close and promised her the world. He talked about their future, about moving to America, about building a life together. Laura wanted to believe every word, but something felt off. Was she being paranoid? Or was there a reason Birkan never seemed to have cash on hand? Was it normal for someone to dodge questions about their past, to change the subject whenever money came up? Laura tried to shake off the doubts, blaming jet lag and nerves, but the questions lingered. She lay awake in the hotel room, listening to Birkan's steady breathing beside her, replaying every moment of the day. Was she overthinking, or was her gut trying to warn her? She wanted to trust him, to trust herself, but the uncertainty gnawed at her. She promised herself she'd get answers, that she'd ask the hard questions, even if she was afraid of what she might hear. But wait till you see what happens when Laura starts asking real questions. Dinner with Birkan's friends was supposed to be a chance for Laura to feel included, to see the world he came from, to finally feel like she belonged in his life. Instead, she found herself sitting at a crowded table, surrounded by laughter and rapid-fire Turkish she couldn't follow, picking at her food and forcing a smile. Every so often, someone would glance her way, offer a polite nod, then slip right back into the conversation as if she wasn't even there. Laura tried to laugh along, but the jokes never made it to her in English, and Birkan seemed more interested in keeping up with his friends than making sure she felt comfortable. The longer the night dragged on, the more Laura's unease grew. She watched Birkan lean in, whispering with one friend, then another, their voices dropping whenever she tried to listen in. Every so often, she'd catch a word she recognized: money, job, America, but the rest was lost in translation. She tried to ask Birkan what they were talking about, but he brushed her off with a quick nothing important, just catching up. Laura wanted to believe him, but the way his eyes darted around the table told a different story. When the check arrived, Birkan barely glanced at it before sliding it across to one of his friends. Laura noticed he didn't even reach for his wallet. She remembered the night before when he'd let her pay for dinner and wondered if this was a pattern. Was he embarrassed, or was there something more going on? She tried to shake off the feeling, but it clung to her like a second skin. After dinner, as they walked back to the hotel, Laura pressed Birkan about his work. He shrugged, said things were complicated, that he was between jobs, and that he'd explain everything soon. But soon never seemed to come. Every question she asked seemed to push him further away, and every answer felt like a half-truth. Laura's mind raced with possibilities. Was he hiding something? Or was she letting her imagination run wild? She wanted to trust him, to believe that love could bridge any gap, but the secrets were piling up faster than she could keep track. Laura thinks she's seen the worst, but the real bombshell is about to drop. The air in the room felt heavy as Birkan finally sat down across from Laura, his face serious in a way she hadn't seen before. He took a deep breath, eyes darting to the floor, and told her he needed to be honest about something big. Laura braced herself, heart pounding, as he started to explain. He talked about his old life, how he'd once owned not one but 3 shisha bars, how business was good until the world turned upside down. COVID hit, lockdowns came, and one by one, his bars closed their doors for good. He sold his car, his house, everything he could, but it wasn't enough. The debt kept piling up, and soon he was drowning in bills he couldn't pay. Laura listened, torn between sympathy and a cold, creeping fear. She knew how hard the pandemic had hit small businesses, how quickly everything could fall apart. Part of her wanted to reach across the table, to comfort him, to say it wasn't his fault. But another part of her, the part that had paid his dinner bill, the part that had watched him dodge questions and pass off checks, couldn't ignore the warning bells ringing in her head. She asked him how much he owed, and Birkan hesitated, then gave her a number that made her stomach drop. It was more than she'd ever imagined, more than she could even picture. The kind of debt that doesn't just go away with a few good months or a lucky break. Birkan's voice was steady, almost rehearsed, as he explained how he'd tried everything to get back on his feet. He'd worked odd jobs, taken whatever he could find, but nothing paid enough to make a dent in what he owed. He looked at Laura, eyes pleading for understanding, and said he was doing his best. Laura wanted to believe him, but something about the way he told the story felt off. Was this the whole truth? Or was there something he wasn't saying? She thought about all the times he'd avoided talking about money, all the vague answers and sudden subject changes. Was he protecting her from the worst of it? Or was he hiding something even bigger? She tried to push the doubts aside, to focus on the man in front of her, but the fear wouldn't let go. If he was in this deep, what would it mean for their future? Could she really build a life with someone carrying this much baggage? If you think this is bad, you haven't heard his real plan for paying it all back. Birkan leaned back, almost relaxed, as if he was about to share a funny story instead of dropping a truth bomb that would shake Laura to her core. He looked her in the eye and said it straight. Every time he got his hands on money, he gambled it. Not sometimes, not as a last resort, but every single time. Laura stared at him, waiting for a punchline. But there was none. He said it like it was the most normal thing in the world, like everyone treats their paycheck as a lottery ticket. The words hung in the air, heavy and impossible to ignore. Laura's mind raced, trying to make sense of what she'd just heard. Was he serious? Was this some kind of twisted joke? But Birkan's face was calm, almost proud as he explained his logic. Gambling, he said, was his job now. It was the only way he knew to make real money, the only way he could hope to pay off his debts. He talked about it like it was a business strategy, not a desperate gamble. Laura felt her anger rising, her hands shaking as she realized the full weight of what he was saying. All those times she'd sent him money, thinking she was helping him get back on his feet, she'd been fueling his addiction instead. The heartbreak hit her like a wave. She thought about the late-night calls, the messages asking for help, the promises that things would get better. She'd believed him, trusted him, and now she saw how deep the deception ran. Every dollar she'd sent, every sacrifice she'd made, had gone straight to the casino, the betting app, the next big risk. Laura's disbelief turned to fury. How could he sit there and act like this was normal? How could he look her in the eye and tell her gambling was his only option, as if there were no other choices, no other way out? Birkan didn't flinch. He insisted this was the only way, that he was doing it for them, for their future. Laura felt sick. She wanted to scream, to cry, to walk out and never look back. But she needed answers. She needed to know if the money she'd sent for food, for rent, for emergencies, had all disappeared into a slot machine or a football bet. But what happens when Laura confronts him about her own money? Laura's voice trembled as she finally asked the question that had been burning in her mind since Birkan's confession. She tried to keep her tone steady, but the words came out sharper than she intended. Did you gamble the money I sent you for food? The silence that followed was deafening. Bacon didn't look away, didn't fidget, didn't even seem embarrassed. He nodded, almost as if he was confirming something obvious, and told her yes, he had. He said it so simply, so flatly, that Laura felt her stomach twist. She wanted to believe there was some misunderstanding, some reason that would make this all make sense. But there wasn't. He'd taken her help, her trust, and turned it into another bet. The anger that surged through Laura was like nothing she'd ever felt before. She thought about every time she'd worried about him, every time she'd skipped her own little luxuries to send him money, every time she told herself she was doing the right thing. She'd pictured him buying groceries, paying rent, maybe even saving a little for the future they talked about. Instead, he'd been risking it all, chasing a win that never seemed to come. Laura's hands shook as she tried to process it. She asked him if he understood how that made her feel, if he realized what he'd done to her trust. Birkan shrugged, said he was sorry she was upset, but insisted he'd only done what he had to do. He said gambling was the only way he could see to fix things, that he was trying to make things better for both of them. Laura couldn't believe what she was hearing. She pressed him, asking if he'd ever considered getting a regular job, if he'd ever thought about a different way out. Birkan shook his head, said the jobs he'd found didn't pay enough, that he'd tried and failed, that gambling was the only thing that gave him hope. Laura saw it then, the denial, the rationalization, the way he twisted every loss into a lesson and every win into proof that he was on the right track. He talked about the big score, the jackpot that would solve everything, as if it was just around the corner. Laura realized she'd heard this before. In every story of addiction, every cycle of hope and disappointment. She saw how he clung to the fantasy, how he convinced himself that the next bet would be the one that changed their lives. She tried to make him see the damage he was doing, not just to himself, but to her, to their relationship, to any future they might have had. She told him how betrayed she felt, how every lie and half-truth had chipped away at her trust. Birkan listened, but his answers never changed. He said he cared about her, that he loved her, that he was doing this for them. Laura wanted to believe him, but she couldn't ignore the facts. She saw how easily he justified his choices, how quickly he dismissed her pain. She wondered if he even understood what he was asking of her, to keep believing, to keep sending money, to keep hoping that things would get better when all the evidence pointed the other way. The conversation spiraled, each answer making Laura feel more alone. She asked him if he'd ever lied to her about where the money went, if he'd ever promised to use it for something else and then gambled it instead. Birkan hesitated, then admitted he had. He said he didn't want to worry her, that he thought he could win it back before she found out. Laura felt her heart break all over again. She realized she'd been living in a fantasy, believing in a version of Birkan that didn't exist. She saw how addiction had warped his thinking, how it had turned every promise into a gamble, every hope into a risk. Laura's fury burned hot, but underneath it was a deep sadness. She thought about all the times she defended him to her friends, all the times she told herself that love was enough. She saw now how much she'd sacrificed, how much she'd lost, and how little she'd gotten in return. She wondered if Birkan even understood what he'd done, if he could see the pain in her eyes, the disappointment in her voice. She wanted to scream, to cry, to walk away and never look back. But she couldn't move. She was frozen, trapped between anger and heartbreak, unable to decide what to do next. Birkan tried to reassure her, saying he'd stop once he hit it big, that he was close, that he could feel it. Laura shook her head, unable to believe him anymore. She saw the cycle for what it was, a never-ending loop of hope and disappointment, of promises and broken trust. She realized she couldn't save him, couldn't fix him, couldn't make him see what he was doing. She could only decide what she was willing to accept, what she was willing to risk, and what she was willing to lose. Laura's about to ask the question we're all screaming at the screen. Laura sat on the edge of the bed, staring at the wall, her mind racing with questions she never thought she'd have to ask. The room felt smaller now, the air thick with everything left unsaid. She tried to picture a future with Birkan, but every image twisted into a nightmare she couldn't shake. What if they got married? What if they opened a joint bank account, pooled their money, started building a life together? Would every paycheck become another bet? Every dollar another risk? The thought made her chest tighten. She imagined herself checking their balance, watching the numbers drop, wondering if the rent would clear or if the lights would stay on. She pictured herself explaining to friends and family why she was always broke, always anxious, always waiting for the next disaster. Birkan noticed her silence and tried to fill it with promises. He said things would be different once they were married, that he'd never touch her money, that he'd only gamble with what was his. He painted a picture of two separate accounts, two separate lives, as if marriage could work that way. He said he'd set aside a little for himself, just enough to chase the big win, and the rest would be safe, untouched, theirs to share. Laura listened, but the words felt empty. She'd heard promises before, watched them crumble under the weight of reality. She wondered if Birkan even believed himself, or if he was just saying what he thought she wanted to hear. He told her he was close, that he could feel a big win coming, that once he hit it, everything would change. He'd pay off his debts, start fresh, give her the life she deserved. Laura wanted to believe him, wanted to hold on to the hope that things could get better. But every story he told sounded like a fairy tale with no happy ending. She thought about all the times he'd said he was close before, all the times he'd lost and tried again, convinced the next bet would be the one. She saw the pattern now, the endless cycle of hope and disappointment, and wondered how many more times she could go through it before she broke. Her mind flashed back to the first days in Turkey, when everything felt new and exciting, when she believed love could fix anything. She remembered the way Birkan looked at her, the way he made her laugh, the way he made her feel seen. She wanted to hold on to that version of him, the man she thought she knew, the man she wanted to build a life with. But the reality in front of her was different. This Birkan was lost, trapped in a world of risk and reward, unable to see the damage he was causing. Laura felt herself pulled in two directions, toward the man she loved and the woman she needed to be to protect herself. She tried to imagine what it would take to stay. Could she live with the uncertainty, the fear, the constant worry about money? Could she trust Birkan to keep his promises, to put their future ahead of his next bet? She thought about the sacrifices she'd already made, the trust she'd already given, and wondered how much more she could afford to lose. She pictured herself years from now, still waiting for things to change, still hoping for a miracle, still making excuses for the man she loved. The thought made her feel small, powerless, trapped in a story she didn't want to be part of. Birkan reached for her hand, his eyes pleading. He said he loved her, that he needed her, that he couldn't do this without her. Laura felt the weight of his words, the desperation in his voice. She wanted to help him, to save him, to believe that love was enough. But she knew, deep down, that love couldn't fix everything. She saw the road ahead, the risks, the heartbreak, the endless cycle of hope and disappointment. She wondered if she was strong enough to walk away, or if she'd let herself get pulled back in. One more time. The room was quiet. The only sound, the ticking of the clock on the wall. Laura stared at her hands, searching for answers she didn't have. She thought about her family, her friends, the life she'd left behind. She wondered what they would say if they knew the truth, if they saw how much she'd given up, how much she'd risked for a love that might never be enough. She felt the tears start to fall, silent and hot, as she realized how close she was to losing herself. Birkan squeezed her hand, promised again that things would change, that he'd find a way to make it work. Laura wanted to believe him, wanted to hold on to the hope that things could get better. But the fear wouldn't let go. She saw the future stretching out in front of her, full of uncertainty and risk, and wondered if she was ready to face it. Will Laura finally walk away, or is she about to make the biggest mistake of her life? Laura lay awake, staring at the ceiling, the city outside humming with life, while her mind spun in circles. Every time she closed her eyes, the same scenes replayed. Birkan's easy smile, his quick excuses, the way he'd brushed off her questions with a joke or a kiss. She remembered the first time she'd noticed something off, the way he'd hesitated when she asked about his job, the way he'd always seemed to need a little help, a little cash, a little understanding. She told herself it was nothing, that every couple had bumps, that love meant patience. But now, in the dark, every red flag felt like a warning she'd ignored, every excuse like a brick in the wall between them. She turned over, clutching her pillow, trying to quiet the storm inside her. She thought about the money she'd sent, the promises he'd made, the future she'd imagined. She wondered if she'd been blind, or if she'd just wanted so badly to believe in something good. The pain of betrayal cut deep, sharper than she expected. It wasn't just about the money, or even the lies. It was about trust, about feeling safe, about knowing the person you love is on your side. Laura felt foolish, angry at herself for missing the signs, for letting hope drown out her instincts. As dawn crept in, Birkan slipped into the room, his face soft with concern. He sat beside her, reaching for her hand, his voice low and apologetic. He said he knew he'd hurt her, that he was sorry, that he wanted to make things right. He promised he'd change, that he'd get help, that he'd do whatever it took to earn her trust again. Laura listened, her heart aching, wanting to believe him, but afraid to let herself hope. She'd heard these words before, felt the pull of his charm, the way he could make her forget everything with a smile or a gentle touch. Birkan tried everything. Sweet words, grand promises, even tears. He talked about their future, about moving to America, about starting over. He said he couldn't imagine his life without her, that she was his anchor, his reason to keep trying. Laura watched him, searching his face for the truth, wondering if he meant it or if this was just another performance. She saw the desperation in his eyes, the fear of losing her, and for a moment, she almost gave in. She wanted to believe that love could fix what was broken, that people could change, that second chances were real. But as the morning light filled the room, Laura felt something shift inside her. She realized she'd been waiting for someone else to save her, to make the hard decisions, to tell her what to do. She saw how much she'd given up, how much she'd risked, how much she'd lost trying to hold on to a dream that wasn't real. She understood, finally, that she couldn't trust Birkan. Not with her heart, not with her future, not with her peace of mind. The only person she could trust was herself. Laura sat up, wiping away tears, her voice steady for the first time in days. She told Birkan she needed space, that she couldn't keep living in fear, that she deserved better. She said she hoped he'd get help, that she wanted him to be happy, but she couldn't be the one to fix him. Birkan begged her to stay, to give him one more chance, to believe in him just a little longer. Laura shook her head, feeling the weight lift from her shoulders, the relief of finally choosing herself. But just when you think Laura's made up her mind, Birkan throws in one last twist. Laura stood by the window, watching the city wake up, her suitcase half packed on the bed behind her. The air in the room felt heavy, thick with everything that had been said and everything that still hung between them. She could hear Birkan moving quietly in the kitchen, the clink of a mug, the low hum of his voice as he rehearsed what he might say next. Laura's heart pounded, her mind racing with the choice in front of her. Stay and risk everything, her money, her future, her sense of self, or leave and save what was left of her dignity. She thought about the girl who'd landed in Turkey full of hope, the woman who now stood on the edge of heartbreak, and wondered how she'd let it get this far. Birkan came in, coffee in hand, his eyes searching her face for a sign. He tried to smile, but it faltered, the weight of the last few days pressing down on both of them. He started to speak, but Laura held up a hand, needing a moment to find her words. She told him she'd spent the night thinking, replaying every moment, every promise, every lie. She said she loved him, that she wanted to believe in him, but she couldn't ignore the truth anymore. She couldn't keep pretending that things would change, that love alone could fix what was broken. She said she needed to leave, to go home, to start over. Birkan's face crumpled, his bravado slipping away as the reality hit him. He begged her to stay, to give him one more chance, to believe that he could change. He promised again that he'd stop gambling, that he'd get help, that he'd do whatever it took to make her happy. Laura listened, her heart breaking all over again. But she knew she couldn't trust those words anymore. She'd heard them too many times, seen too many second chances turn into more disappointment. She told him she hoped he would get better, that she wanted the best for him, but she couldn't be the one to save him. The silence that followed was thick with grief. Birkan sat down hard on the edge of the bed, his head in his hands, his shoulders shaking. Laura felt the tears slip down her cheeks, the pain of letting go almost too much to bear. She thought about all the dreams they'd shared, all the plans they'd made, and felt the loss of what could have been. She wondered if she'd ever be able to trust again, if she'd ever be able to open her heart without fear. She thought about the red flags she'd ignored, the warnings she'd brushed aside, and promised herself she'd never make the same mistake again. Birkan tried one last time, reaching for her hand, his voice raw with emotion. He told her he loved her, that he needed her, that he couldn't do this without her. Laura squeezed his hand, her own voice shaking as she told him goodbye. She said she hoped he'd find the strength to change, that he'd remember what they'd shared, but she couldn't stay and watch him destroy himself. She picked up her suitcase, her heart heavy but her resolve clear, and walked out the door. The hallway felt endless, every step echoing with memories of laughter, of hope, of love that wasn't enough. Laura made her way to the street, the city buzzing around her, the future uncertain but her spirit lighter than it had been in weeks. She knew the road ahead wouldn't be easy, that healing would take time, but she also knew she'd made the right choice. She'd chosen herself, her peace, her future. Back in the apartment, Birkan sat alone, the silence pressing in. He stared at the door, willing her to come back, to give him one more chance. But as the hours passed, he realized she was gone, that he'd lost the one person who'd believed in him. He thought about the choices he'd made, the risks he'd taken, and wondered if he'd ever be able to break free from the cycle that had cost him everything. For Laura, the aftermath was a mix of relief and regret. She missed Birkan, missed the way he made her feel, missed the dream of a life together. But she also felt proud. Proud that she'd found the strength to walk away. Proud that she'd listened to her instincts. Proud that she'd chosen herself. She knew there would be hard days ahead, moments when she'd question her decision, but she also knew she'd never settle for less than she deserved again. The real cost of ignoring red flags isn't just heartbreak, it's losing yourself, piece by piece, until you don't recognize the person in the mirror. Laura learned that lesson the hard way, but she also learned that it's never too late to choose yourself, to start over, to believe in a better future. She walked away with scars, but also with hope, with the knowledge that she was stronger than she'd ever imagined. But if you think this story ends here, wait till you see what Laura does next. Laura's story doesn't end with a slammed door or a tearful goodbye in a foreign city. If anything, that moment was just the start of a new chapter, one that's messier, braver, and more unpredictable than anything she could have imagined when she first stepped off that plane. As she rolled her suitcase through the airport, her phone buzzed with messages from friends back home, some worried, some angry, all of them desperate to know what happened. She didn't have the words yet. Not for them, not even for herself. All she knew was that she was leaving behind more than just a relationship. She was leaving behind the version of herself who thought love meant saving someone, who thought hope could outlast reality, who thought she could change a man who didn't want to change. But the world doesn't pause for heartbreak. Laura's flight home was a blur of sleepless hours and silent tears. But as the plane touched down, something inside her shifted. She realized she wasn't just running away from Birkan, she was running toward herself. The first days back were hard. She replayed every conversation, every promise, every red flag she'd ignored. She wondered if she'd made the right choice, if she'd ever trust again, if she'd ever stop missing the man she thought Birkan could be. But with every sunrise, the pain dulled just a little, replaced by a stubborn kind of hope. Not hope for Birkan, not hope for a miracle, but hope for herself. For a future where she could laugh again, trust again, love again, on her own terms. Meanwhile, Birkan's world was shrinking. The apartment felt emptier without Laura's laughter, the days longer without her calls. He tried to fill the silence with old habits, but nothing felt the same. Friends stopped calling, debts kept piling up, and the big win he'd always chased seemed further away than ever. For the first time, he started to wonder if maybe, just maybe, he'd been wrong. Maybe Laura was right. Maybe love wasn't about taking chances with someone else's heart. Maybe it was about showing up, telling the truth, and doing the hard work to become someone worth loving. But old habits die hard, and Birkan's journey was far from over. What happened next? Well, Laura didn't disappear into the background. She started sharing her story, first with close friends, then with a wider circle. She wanted people to know what she'd been through, not for sympathy, but so no one else would feel as alone as she had. She talked about the warning signs, the excuses, the way hope can blind you to the truth. She found strength in her vulnerability, and slowly, she started to rebuild. She picked up old hobbies, reconnected with friends, and even started dating again. This time with her eyes wide open. She wasn't looking for a savior or a project. She was looking for someone who could meet her where she was, scars and all. But Birkan wasn't done with Laura, not by a long shot. He reached out, first with apologies, then with promises, then with pleas. He said he'd changed, that he was getting help, that he couldn't imagine his life without her. Laura listened, her heart aching, but she knew better now. She set boundaries, kept her distance, and focused on her own healing. Still, part of her wondered, could people really change? Was there a future where forgiveness was possible, or was it safer to keep the past in the past? And then, just when Laura thought she'd finally closed the door on that chapter, a new twist arrived. A mutual friend sent her a message. Birkan had checked himself into a rehab program. He was serious this time, they said. He was attending meetings, working with counselors, trying to make amends. Laura felt a rush of emotions, relief, skepticism, even a flicker of hope. She didn't know what to believe, didn't know if this was another gamble or the start of something real. But she knew one thing for sure. She wasn't responsible for his recovery. She could cheer him on from a distance, but she couldn't walk the path for him. As weeks turned into months, Laura's life kept moving forward. She started a new job, traveled with friends, and found joy in the little things. A good book, a sunny day, a quiet moment of peace. She still thought about Birkan sometimes, still wondered what might have been, but she didn't let those thoughts define her. She was more than her heartbreak, more than her mistakes, more than the story she'd lived with Birkan. She was writing a new story now, one where she was the hero, not the victim. But the universe has a way of testing your resolve just when you think you've got it all figured out. One evening, Laura got a call from an unknown number. She almost didn't answer, but something made her pick up. It was Birkan. His voice was different, quieter, steadier, but still unmistakably him. He told her about rehab, about the work he was doing, about the things he'd realized since she left. He didn't ask her to come back. He didn't make promises he couldn't keep. He just wanted to say thank you for loving him, for believing in him, for walking away when he couldn't. Laura listened, tears streaming down her face, and for the first time, she felt a sense of closure. Maybe this was the real ending. Or maybe it was a new beginning, not for them as a couple, but for two people learning to heal on their own. So, what's next for Laura and Birkan? Will Birkan's recovery stick, or will old habits pull him back? Will Laura open her heart to someone new, or will the scars of the past keep her guarded? And what happens when their paths cross again? Will it be a moment of forgiveness, or a reminder of everything they've lost? If you want to know how this story unfolds, you won't want to miss what happens next. Because sometimes, the most dramatic twists aren't the ones you see coming, they're the ones that change you forever. If you're ready for the next chapter in Laura and Birkan's saga, where secrets come to light, new faces enter the picture, and the past refuses to stay buried, make sure you stick around for our next video. Trust me, you haven't seen anything yet.